I hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate it. So thank you for joining our Pediatric Hub today. First, let me introduce myself. So my name is Megan Kapi'olani, and I am the founder of Long COVID Families, which is a national nonprofit that supports children with long COVID and associated conditions. We also support families because we believe that the best way to support the child is to support the family. The reason I founded Long COVID Families is because when I was a child, I was diagnosed with mono twice. The first time was when I was 11, and I developed symptoms I struggled to explain or even understand, particularly a sensation in my chest that I could not articulate. I would simply tell adults that it felt like I couldn't breathe, but all my tests were normal. I was told I had anxiety. I would tell adults that I couldn't think, and they told me to focus on eating more vegetables and try harder to focus. I told adults that I felt tired, so very tired, and they told me to get a better night's sleep because there was no evidence that anything was wrong. I was diagnosed again with mono at 14. My symptoms intensified. By 18, I was losing consciousness regularly and given a clinical diagnosis of partial complex seizures. I struggled through my 20s. I barely made it through college, but I made it. However, I gave up on any career ambitions I had because I was simply focused on staying employed, somewhere, anywhere. I frequently lost my job because I wasn't able to get out of bed, or I would make a major mistake at work on a day I couldn't think clearly. I didn't know the term brain fog back then. Doctors told me it was depression, which didn't make sense to me because I was depressed because I couldn't get out of bed. Why would that be the reason I was in bed in the first place? But I went ahead and tried therapy and took all the pills, desperate to get better. It didn't change anything physically. I got married and had a child. The stress of the pregnancy and caring for a newborn was too much for my body. I crashed and crashed hard. For the next 3 years, I spent approximately 80% of my time bedridden, unable to care for myself or my child most days. I had to send my child to daycare despite technically being a stay-at-home mom because I was unable to stand up on most days. Until I finally got in front of the right doctor who asked the right questions and knew to refer me to the right hospital that ran the right tests. And suddenly I went from almost 30 years of your tests are normal to your tests indicate you have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, and hypermobility. I had never heard of any of those conditions. I was at a well-respected dysautonomia clinic, and after going through my detailed medical history with the doctor, he told me that the mono infections from my childhood almost certainly triggered these conditions. I learned that day that the sensation in my chest that I struggled to describe was actually tachycardia that I first experienced when I was 11 years old. And I learned that when I was 39. Almost 30 years later, after I told adults, I can't breathe, I can't think, I'm tired all the time. It was also determined that the seizure disorder was a misdiagnosis. The doctor provided me with prescriptions and lifestyle management strategies to manage my symptoms, and I could finally get out of bed most days. 2 years later, COVID descended upon us, and as I listened to the pundits on TV say that COVID doesn't affect children, I felt a chill run down my spine as I thought to myself, how would they know? Because if anyone understood how an infection-triggered condition could be missed in a child, it was me. So I posted my conditions on social media for the first time in April 2020, telling my story as a warning to my friends, and I kept posting. By fall, I started getting messages like, my sister's son had COVID. It's months later. He's not better, and his symptoms sound like yours. And then more messages, and then more messages. And that's what led to long COVID families. Back to the question I had in April 2020. How would I know if kids are okay or if they need help? How would anyone know? I believe Recover is part of the answer to that question. Recover will help prevent another child from struggling to survive for 30 years without treatment. It is why I am more than happy to be a patient advocate for Recover and work to help recruit caregivers specifically to represent their communities and children in the Recover initiative. Long COVID Family centers children in our advocacy. We provide support for identifying symptoms in children, navigating the medical system, and education accommodation support. We have a community of supportive caregivers, and a trauma-informed caregiver support group is currently in development. I can drop that information in the chat if there's any caregivers needing support. I wasn't expecting to get emotional, but as you can see how important this work is, and I so appreciate everybody who's involved and participating.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie McCoy, and I am one of the presenters today. So I am with the Avera Research Institute in South Dakota, and we are a site as a part of the Arkansas Hub. And so we have been enrolling in the main pediatric cohort in the study. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about our experiences. So thanks so much to the Recover team for reaching out to include us in on this presentation. We're happy to share our information. So a little bit of background on our site's enrollment. We were activated last April, so almost exactly a year ago, and we're able to complete our first enrollment towards the end of April of 2022. Initially, our site set to enroll 133 participants within the study. And at that time, we weren't entirely sure on what the recruitment period would be. And so we set a goal for ourselves to enroll and meet this goal within 6 months. So we made sure that we were staying on target with the study goals and could move into the follow-up phases as needed. And so this chart here shows our entire study enrollment up until the middle of January of 2023. And so you can see here the dark blue line is our original 6-month enrollment goal to the 133. The darker orange line is the projected enrollment for our final enrollment goal, and then the light yellow line is our actual enrollment. So at the beginning of those first few months, you can see we were off to a little bit of a slower start, dependent on some challenges that we faced within some of our recruitment methods, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we really hit our stride in the summer months, which was great. And then around September, we met that initial goal of 133. And so in order to just continue on with the momentum that we had, we decided that we would over-enroll to 150 participants. And then once we met that goal in October, we decided we were no longer actively recruiting, but would take referrals in and calls in from participants who would still be interested in the study. So some of the obstacles that we faced, our research center is a community-based research center. And so we do have 2 sites that are enrolling within the Recover study. One is in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and one is in Rapid City, South Dakota. And so those 2 sites are about 350 miles apart. And so it's about a 5.5-hour drive between sites. We span the entire state of South Dakota, and we also enroll in the surrounding areas as well. But this can be a challenge because neither of our sites are located on the main hospital campus that our institution is a part of. And so we're not based in the clinics. We can't just run up to a floor if there's a potential family for enrollment. So that's a challenge that we faced initially. And then as a part of our health system, we do also have rural clinics that expand across the entirety of the state and into surrounding states as well. And so we're not easily at this time able to run up to those clinics and be as present as we would hope to be in order to engage families in those areas. And then I know other sites across the Recover study have been working to enroll from long COVID clinics, but within our health system, we do not have a long COVID clinic set up. So that's another challenge that we weren't able to kind of move past within our area. So like I mentioned, we were kind of off to a slower start. And so initially when we started enrollment, we were going off of reports that were coming from our medical record. And the people that were on these reports were individuals who had tested positive for COVID within the health system. And this, like I mentioned, our health system spans across the state and into surrounding areas as well. And so some of these individuals were local to the areas that we were located in and some were not. And because this was some cold calling that we would have and, letters and emails that would go out to these individuals that maybe weren't the most fruitful. We've seen that historically in other studies that we've been a part of, and I know other sites have faced this as well. It's hard to engage those participants who were cold calling because they may not know about research. They may think that it's, a spam call or are unsure of the legitimacy of what we're trying to reach out to them about. So that was a challenge for us. And then we just didn't get much response from those calls in, or even if we did get a hold of the families and set up a consent conversation, we wouldn't necessarily hear back from them when we tried to call them back and consent as well. We did have some flyers and other materials located in external clinics in some of our cities, but we didn't get a great response from those as well. Definitely some inquiries, but not as much as we would have hoped. So some of the successes that we found within the study for enrollment was engaging with previous study participants. Our team's been doing research, longitudinal observational research, especially working with the pediatric population for many years. And we re-engaged with those families to see if they would be interested in participating in this new study within Recover. And we got a great response from them. They were very happy to be a part of research, but also to be able to provide this information and hopefully help find answers for those who are suffering from long COVID. We definitely saw that there were families within our previous studies that were experiencing these long COVID symptoms, and we're very passionate about becoming involved as well. And then another success that we found was engaging large families. If we have a caregiver who's very involved in research and is a strong advocate for being involved in the study, but they have 3, 4, 5 children, that assisted with our meeting enrollment goals very well. And then we knew that they were going to be reliable participants who were able to come in office, complete all the surveys, do all the assessments. And so we can really depend on those families. And so that was a great success for us as well. And then within this group, we also engaged via mass mailers in pre-existing study materials that were going out. And then we did see a good response if we had already established connections and relationships with previous study participants. When they saw the mailer and knew it was a new opportunity, they were happy to give us a call and engage that way. We did receive some great response from website inquiries from the National Recover Study, as well as our local website. We have a submission form that participants can reach out to let us know that they're interested, not only in research, but specifically in Recover as well. And so that was a great resource for us. We did have some good word of mouth from participants sharing their involvement with their friends and family, and then referring them to our study center to see if they would be eligible or interested in participating. And so we found that as a success as well. We did do some local news stories with our PI, Dr. Amy Elliott, so that she could share a little bit about long COVID as well as the study that's going on. And we were able to get some good response from that. And then we also completed some department presentations within our center. And so we reach out and we share information about our studies as a whole, all the studies that are going on, and then individuals who maybe were on those presentations or in the meetings contacted us and let us know that they would be interested in engaging their family and enrolling them in the study as well. So a few things that we learned throughout our enrollment process is, like I mentioned, engaging those large families is key, and they're very dependable and are very supportive of our research. And then focusing on recruitment in our catchment area was very successful. Within our area, it's difficult for people to come in for those visits if it's a 2-3 hour drive. And so that was a hindrance for us when approaching families who maybe lived further away. And so when we were focusing and doing the bulk of our recruitment, we didn't have the information on the travel reimbursement. And so I think that had we had that back then, that would have been a big aid for engaging those more rural populations and participants. But I know it's something that we're excited is available now for sites who are enrolling and even for our current participants who are struggling to make it in for those in-person visits. And then, sharing on social platforms is always a great idea. We've done a few Facebook posts within our team's Facebook page, and then sharing the information on websites and in the media stories as well. And so a few of the things that we would do now, we're more in the follow-up phase and not doing that active recruitment like I mentioned. And so if we were continuing to do the active recruitment at this time at our site, we would really capitalize and utilize the community engagement resources that have been made. The print materials that have been created are very helpful and great to use. And so we would, try to get those out in the community as much as possible in clinics and in those mailers even more. And then the study videos that really walk potential participants through what's involved is a great resource and a great tool that would be wonderful to use to make potential participants feel more comfortable with knowing what they would be getting involved in within the study. And then continuing to capitalize on the local news stories so we can engage those families who maybe aren't pre-existing in our research, pre-existing participants in our research, and just sharing it so we can engage more families and communities. And then doing more provider education and engagement within our health system. We're working on a few different pieces to engage those clinics as much as we can in the future, but really capitalizing on those so they can share those individuals who may be experiencing long COVID and send them our way for recruitment. So those are a few of the things that we've learned and what we're doing. And so that's what I had to share, but I appreciate everyone taking the time to attend today, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we move through the Q&A section a little later in the presentation.
So next, and I'm going to try my hardest to say this, next we have, and my eyesight's a little blurry, so forgive me, but Kapi'olani Medical Center for Women and Children. Please correct me because I'm sure I said that wrong.
No, you're totally fine. Hi, my name is Dr. Jessica Kosett, and I am one of the co-investigators at Kapi'olani Medical Center for Women and Children in Honolulu, Hawaii. We are part of the Arkansas Hub as well as Avera, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you about our site and our location. So as you can imagine, it is actually similar, Hawaii is, to other rural sites, given just the broad range of area from where our patients come from. But we found that we really wanted to focus enrollment on the residents of Oahu. That's where Honolulu is located, and it's the site of our Women and Children's Hospital, which is Kapi'olani. And that is the only children's hospital in the state. So it was going to be challenging to recruit patients from the neighbor islands in order for them to come in for visits. So we really found that we needed to focus on Oahu. We needed to focus on English-speaking patients. And for us, that's really a challenge because we have a lot of families who are Chinese-speaking, Japanese-speaking, and we also have, because we're in the Pacific Basin, a lot of families that come to us who are from the Marshall Islands and speak many different dialects of Marshallese. And those are difficult languages to translate materials and to really share information medically. And so we really focused on our English-speaking population, although a lot of our Marshallese families, a lot of our Native Hawaiian families do speak English and can communicate in English, and therefore can still be a part of our study. We also focused our age group on ages 7 to 25. We found that we just didn't have capacity for some of the testing that was required in the younger age group. We used kind of a three-prong approach for our recruitment efforts. What I'll tell you about Hawaii, which is kind of funny, and Honolulu, is that it's 1 million people, but it's probably the biggest little small town you can imagine, where people really know each other. People are often related or are close family friends. And so word of mouth is really a powerful utilization, was something that we could utilize. The other is media, and the third was utilizing our electronic medical record, which is Epic. Word of mouth really was the most effective recruitment method, and it really gave us our most compliant participants. And the different ways that we did it was much like Avera. We went to department meetings across the hospital. We shared presentations, and from there, people were able to either recruit friends and families or themselves or their children. And then we spoke to, obviously, our study team, spoke to their friends and families. Participants and caregivers also spoke to their friends. We really made a push within our Department of Pediatrics to all of the pediatricians and got physician referrals. And that was really important because many of our pediatricians do practice in more remote areas of Oahu and part of the federally qualified health centers, which was really important to us because we wanted to make sure that we really got the diversity of patients and we're not just seeking patients from directly the Honolulu area or just people who worked at the medical center. We also have an adult recover study in Honolulu, and they, some of their adult participants asked about the pediatric portion of the study, and they were referred over as well. We did a big push with our communications department in the medical center, and they were already trying to pitch COVID stories to the media. So they really thought that this was a great way to both be able to talk about recover, but it also gave us the opportunity to promote just a lot of health practices, including vaccination. And I think our Hawaii Pacific Health Communications Department really does a great job. They were able to lead us to one of the news agencies. From there came a podcast. We also did some work in the local paper, and then the stories from there were picked up by other local as well as some national papers. And so the really big push that we had was those first 2 weeks in September. And why we really wanted to do this media coverage was our goal was here to really talk about the importance of Hawaii residents getting involved in the study and how we wanted to make sure that our patients and our specific ethnic diversity was represented in the national study. When we had done a some prior focus groups around the receptiveness of our population to studies, what people pointed out was that they wanted national studies coming to Hawaii, and they also wanted to really hear about that information across various communication methods. One was through the media. The other was hearing about it from their own doctors. And so we felt like we were covering that both with the media approach, but also having our pediatricians talk to families. And we were really, again, stressing the importance of our population getting involved in this national study and allowing our, having our patients participate. So these are kind of some of the examples of the media push. And I think for a period of time, I felt like no one wanted to see my picture or hear from me anymore. But after that 2 weeks, thankfully, it stopped. As you can see, a lot of media coverage. So the media push did really help us. The inquiries came in throughout the month of September, and people had seen the news that day when it first aired or later on through some of the podcasts and on the web. We got 29 inquiries, and from that, we screened 20 patients. And what happened there in that drop in numbers was that when we reached back out to people, they either didn't live on Oahu and lived on one of the neighbor islands, which was a little bit tougher for them to come over, or they didn't respond back to some of the phone calls that were made. Some were age less than 7 years old. And in the end, we were able to enroll 12 participants. Another important aspect was utilizing our electronic medical record, which is called Epic. And what we were hoping to do here was really kind of identify some of the active COVID cases, because we didn't want to just get obviously healthy participants. So we were using reports that we received from the ED. One of my co-PI is an ED physician, so he was able to reach out to patients and inform them about the study. And if they were interested, then their information was forwarded to our study coordinator. And then we, as a hospitalist, I was able to monitor hospital admissions and then speak to families whose children were admitted with COVID and to see if they might be interested in participating. And then, of course, we got the great postcards from Recover Communications, and we were able to utilize those as well in sending them out to these patients that were identified through our electronic medical record. And what we really appreciated is that Recover did a wonderful job featuring children and young adults, but also featuring participants who would look like those people would reside in Hawaii and were representative of the ethnic groups that we have. And then, of course, personalized with our medical center logo, which is identified with pediatric care within our state. And then we distributed this to caregivers in person after our conversation about COVID, and it allowed them to find what the website was and also to better understand what the study was all about. So we screened 56 patients, we enrolled 44, and our goal was 27. And like I mentioned, I really think word of mouth was probably our most powerful tool, as was the media campaign. And I think we're feeling good about the fact that we were able to get, a comprehensive representation of our state, and that was what was really important to us. I still think that we'd like to recruit some more, and we are looking to get more of our active COVID patients, and just kind of filling in the last gaps for any populations that we might have missed in our initial go around. So again, thanks so much for having me and for allowing us to share about our site.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Okay, so next we have Nemours Children's Health System.
Hi, my name is Karen. I am with Nemours, also part of the Arkansas Hub as my prior two presenters. I am the lead coordinator, and Dr. Judith Ross is our principal investigator, but we couldn't have done anything that we did without an amazing staff, and I just had to recognize them here in this slide. Thus far, our goal was 155 patients. Thus far, we have enrolled 163 patients. In contrast to my previous presenters, the majority of our patients have been enrolled through email, and I'm going to walk you through that process. Some of my slides are very busy, so they will be available after the presentation. So I will talk briefly about BRIC. That is our Nemours Biomedical Research Informatics Center, and they do many things at Nemours, but for our purposes, they helped us work through our electronic health record, or EPIC, in order to separate out the COVID positive patients. So they didn't do that alone either. They had the help of many data bases from the NIH and also from the government. HRSA helped to identify further the rural and underserved populations. They essentially looked at anyone that tested positive in our system or didn't test positive, anybody that had a COVID test and any COVID diagnosis code or even a long COVID diagnosis. So what was included in that BRIC report that was eventually sent to us? So you can see there were many, many data points that are included in the BRIC report, which we receive weekly. We were mainly interested, as you can see on the bottom right, in the acute population, the rural and underserved populations, but we really wanted the patient's email and mobile phone number. Importantly, on the bottom of the second column, highlighted in yellow, you see no contact. And what that means is that when patients register at Nemours through the EPIC system, they can opt out of research. And so we did not contact those patients. So every week we get a report from BRIC which our research coordinator, Connie, separates into 3 lists. Those are the controls who became infected, and the acute infected. And as everyone knows on Recover, acute infected means that they were diagnosed within the last 30 days. We then take those reports are then filtered even further, ruling out patients that are no longer with us. We are currently not enrolling non-English speaking patients and those that do not live in our catchment area, anticipating that we will need to bring them in. Once those lists are filtered, we then copy and paste the caregivers' emails into an email template that includes the link to our screener if they're interested. If there is no email provided, we will send out a text to those patients. It's a little hard to see this, but many of you may be familiar with this, but this is a Recover used email template, and basically briefly describes the study to the patient, and included in there is an email to answer or to go directly to the screener. How did we get the screener? REDCap, as many of you may know, is a widely used survey system. Our REDCap was designed by our coordinators, our principal investigator in the team, and it was created to really look at eligibility for the study. So the screener that you saw the link for will follow. You can keep scrolling through the next slides. So there's the screener. You will start at the left, and it's very simple: name and date of birth, and then more specific information about the study. Next slide. And again, these questions are modeled in the electronic data capture form that we all know for the study itself. So once they complete the screener, that screener automatically goes back to our group email, which is PACStudy@Nemours. And that email goes to all the coordinators and Dr. Ross. We get an alert once that screening form comes in, and we click and open it again just to make sure that eligibility criteria is correct. And then we will email the patient again and give them a little bit more information about the study, including study reimbursement. We are confirming that they are the patient's legal guardian. And we will also include in that follow-up an email asking them when they can schedule a consent call. And we also attach the study consent form and key information sheets. And we all know what these look like because everybody's probably seen them, and they are age specific. When approximately twice since we started enrollment back in the spring, we then incorporated our marketing team, and we sent out an email blast. And that was sent out to thousands of patients who had been on the BRIC report from the beginning. We've done that twice. And that email blast was sent to everyone who didn't respond in the first place. And that email looked exactly like what I showed you in the beginning. We did try to advertise. Kidshealth.org is actually a national website that was created by a Nemours physician. It's the most visited children's health website in the world. There's about 1 million hits. The ads were created by our business strategy unit, and we can recognize these too. So with the help of Recover, parents or patients can log on and see these ads. There is also a Get Well network at Nemours, which means that patients can see this when they're an inpatient. It's on their TVs in the rooms. It appears at 8:30 on the second day of admission. Next, I'm sorry. Okay. So they see this on their screen, and they can click on the screen whether they want to learn more or not. Also, if they got on the Nemours website, they can look for any research trials at all that are present at Nemours, and they can find this ad, which also includes links to contact us and the screener. We also post it on Facebook and Twitter. Okay, so other than that, there also are ads that are seen at Nemours throughout the hospital. They run throughout the day, and there is a link. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Let's see if it works. Yeah, there you go. So this was what people will see as they're walking through the hospital. One patient did see it in the ER and then reached out to us. So that's what that ad looks like. And there's an email at the end that they can reach out to that group study email. So we did have a few patients that we recruited through word of mouth. Initially, we did try sending out texts with the link that you can see here. But for the most part, as I said in the beginning, email was our most successful way of getting patients. So I finished 30 seconds early. So thank you, and I will be happy to entertain any questions.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to our Q&A session. I just want to remind everybody, if we could, make sure we're trying to use the raise hand function. You are welcome to turn on your video camera if you're comfortable to do so. And please remain muted if you're not speaking. So let me go ahead and ask.
Oh, Megan, I see one question in the chat from Larry.
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The question is, was Nemours allowed to send out the email blast to any family that was pulled as potentially eligible from the EHR pool, or did these families need to have requested prior to receive information about future research?
No, it was, as stated from the beginning, it was from that initial, data, all those initial points from BRIC. And then if they opted out of research, then we didn't contact them at all. And that excluded the patients for the email blast as well.
Okay, so your EHR collects that information from families when they're within the health system, asking them if they want to know already. Right. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. That's what I was wondering.
Okay, I see an additional question that says, since some of this is patient-facing, was the study/IRB approval needed?
I'm not sure who you are asking, but yes, everything had to be approved by the central IRB and our IRB in addition, and I'm sure that's true for every site.
Thank you for answering, because the timing of the question looks like that was directed at you, so that worked out. This says, hi, Laura. I was aware of the community listening groups, but would love to hear more about their findings. When we did research listening groups and focus groups in Hawaii, I found it to be really important findings that should be guiding our practices. So that looks like that's a question.
That was my response for Laura Wagner, and she's going to email me.
And she's going to email you
that information. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I'll scroll up a little bit more. Here's a question. What strategies are sites using to enhance participation of diverse populations and groups, but which seems to be working the best, would you all say? Like if you had to say which one was the best for you?
I can speak to our site a little bit on this one. So within our medical record reports that we receive that sound very similar to the ones that both Karen and Dr. Krausen mentioned, we are able to pull demographic information from those as well. And so as we're looking to engage other diverse populations from, whether it's rurality or by race or ethnicity, we can gear our recruitment towards those families as a priority to make sure that we have a well-represented population. We are also able to do that within our other research studies that we have as well, if the participants have agreed to future contact, since that's information we have on file for them too. So we've been able to ensure that we're reaching out to all different types of populations to engage them.
Great. Would any of the other sites like to offer what they consider their best working strategy?
I think engaging our pediatricians who work in those areas that are predominantly our Native Hawaiian populations was really important, and they already have those relationships existing with their patients, and I think that is a great way for us to be able to engage those families.
Another question we have are what strategies can be employed to increase the recruitment of children acutely infected?
Within our site, as we moved to, or as we've been working from pulling those EMR reports, like I mentioned initially, that was based off of COVID infection. And so we were able to sort those lists and focus our recruitment efforts on those who had been infected within the last 30 days. And then we also did see some pretty good success with enrolling participants who were coming into the clinic for other studies. And if they called and said they needed to reschedule because they had COVID, then we could approach them at that time and let them know that we had a study opportunity for them specifically for COVID, as well for long COVID, to learn a little bit more within the pediatric population. So those are a few methods that we have used to connect with those families who are acutely infected.
Rebecca, I see your hand.
Hi, I had a question for Karen. In one of the earlier slides, it looked like it listed populations that you were groups that you had in your study, and I wanted to ask, are you recruiting patients who already have long COVID, who are diagnosed or not diagnosed, but who have already been sick for months or years? That I wasn't sure in your slides if that was included, because it looked like you had acute patients who had acute COVID controls, and I think there was one other category, but I didn't see patients who already had symptoms that were extended symptoms from before. Are you considering those in your study?
I believe from study protocol, and Kathy, I can see you on the line, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe anybody that tested positive ever from the beginning of the pandemic would be included. Depending upon when you had a positive test or your child did, I'm sure that we could have included you.
They don't have to have a positive test though, correct? Because I was part of the study development at the beginning, and we made sure that didn't have to be. Right.
No, you didn't necessarily have to have a positive test. You can, because of some criteria, symptoms, if you think you were positive, I think you can be included as well.
Hi everyone.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that question. I did want to clarify that all children are really welcome to be part of Recover. And so we are welcoming children and young adults who had a history of a prior COVID infection, or including those that did not have a history of a prior COVID infection. And we really do appreciate that feedback, that especially in the beginning of the pandemic, so many children didn't have access to testing. And so that is not a requirement for being enrolled. And we are especially interested in enrolling children who have symptoms of long COVID or have been diagnosed with long COVID. So all of those families are needed for the study.
So while we're on the topic of testing for a moment, I apologize, my camera doesn't want to work with me right now, but so there was a recent meta-analysis that came out about long COVID. It included some things about children. I don't know if everybody saw that, is familiar. I don't remember the name of it offhand, but in it identified that 90% of children who were in these studies identified as long COVID did not have a positive test. And that the PCR false negative rate in children in some cases can be up to 90%. So that's challenging for the testing. It's part of the reason so much confusion within the community. And we get so many parents saying something's going on. We don't know what it is. So I'm glad to hear we're just kind of like, we'll come on board. Let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think it's so important to include such a wide spectrum of experiences that children have been going through. So those that didn't have access to testing but had symptoms, those that didn't even have symptoms but developed them later. We have all of these families are so important to include.
And I want to take an opportunity to highlight that because children don't really have the language of illness, because they don't fully understand what is normal functioning for their body, it requires typically an adult to observe and notice a pattern to say, wait a minute, that's not normal, because it's very internal, right? Like all the stuff that's going on. And for adults usually identify it as in like this felt sense, like they feel it in their body and they've had decades to know that's not normal. Or they're like, well, I used to work a 40-hour week and now I struggle to go to the grocery store. That's not normal for me. It's harder, right, for children. So what can happen is it can take, oftentimes we don't hear from families for 6 to 9 months. And the child won't have tested positive, but everybody else in the family did, right? And so then there's like a parent finally puts it together and goes, wait a minute, there's a pattern here that started around the time the family got infected. And it takes them like 6 months to really put it together. So it just highlights it's really complicated with children. And the other question I personally have, because we are seeing a pattern in our community of a child will get a COVID infection and then get a bacterial infection and then get a viral infection, and then oftentimes get another COVID infection, all within like 3 months. And especially with like strep and things. So in the study, I mean, lots of different things can trigger lots of different symptoms. And I was just wondering, like, I don't even know how you would address that, or if you're addressing that. Does that make sense? Does it matter what infections triggering stuff for your study?
Megan, is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's such an important experience that you're describing. And these are some of the things we are looking to be able to examine over time as part of the pediatric study, in that many of our children can be followed up to the 4 years. And we are trying to capture in our follow-up studies how many COVID infections children are experiencing. And we hope to even be able to roll out more active enrollment in between our scheduled assessments, potentially using a mobile health platform or being able to give little extra surveys, so we can begin to know how repeated infections are affecting the symptoms over time.
Yeah. Also, I'll just flag, in case it hasn't really hit your radar yet, and we're just seeing it really at the community level, is I don't know if there was like a wave of infection because of the strep throat that was going around. There were a lot of neuropsychiatric symptoms showing up in our community right now. In a result. So it was like someone had long COVID and then maybe they got strep and something else got triggered. Okay. So I think was told there was Jasmine, did you see another question? I just want to get that in before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I did. Libya Frank had a question in the chat that says she was wondering what strategies teams found helpful to facilitate scheduling participant visits. Her team has struggled a bit with pediatric studies because of working within restrictive schedules of the protocol and the lives of family and children. So really strategies for helping to schedule events. And I saw Dr. Kasut, he answered some in the chat, but wanted to pose it to the other sites as well.
I would also echo what Dr. Kasut has said. We try to offer flexible hours to our participants. We have evenings that were open during the week, really capitalizing on those no school days. And the summer months have been very helpful for us as well. Parents are much more willing to come in during the day when they don't have to pull kids out of school. It is helpful to have the large visit windows that the Recover study has set for these visits, so that we can try to capitalize on, winter breaks, school days, or in the summer months as well. So that's what we've tried to focus our best on.
Oh, I think there's actually a question for me. Is that what do I mean by neuropsychiatric symptoms after strep? If you're familiar with PANDAS or PANS, so what we've been seeing actually in January and February, right after the holiday season mostly, is that we were getting a lot of kids, obsessive behavior, high sensory processing issues, intolerance of loud noises, that kind of thing. I've had this personally. It's like neuroinflammation is what triggers it for a lot of the kids, and it's kind of what we were seeing. And so lots of meltdowns, lots of tics, those kinds of things. Really symptoms that mirror PANDAS. And then so a lot of our children had success with a what is it? It's a tapered steroid intervention, but it seems to be, and I don't know if long COVID kids are more vulnerable, but it just seemed like they had long COVID and somehow like when they got hit with the next infection, it triggered it. We're seeing a lot of like, forgive the metaphor, but COVID almost cocks the gun and the next infection comes over and pulls the trigger a little bit. And the symptoms just get so what I would call loud. Yeah, Rebecca, I see your hand. And then we need to wrap up.
Sorry, my kid has PANS. He got it from a reinfection, his second reinfection. We've had multiple reinfections. Was Omicron. And everything you said, but I just want to like make a point that this long COVID is bad. PANS is worse. It's like completely like it's like you lose your kid while they have a PANS flare.
Yes.
They're like a completely different person. And you don't know if you're going to get them back.
It can look like a psychiatric break.
It does. It also like looks to other people like severe autism.
Yes.
And it comes back with like new infections.
Yes.
Like even if you get them in a good place, like even the like smallest stress, a new infection, anything like brings on little bits or a lot, and like they completely lose it. It's like I've compared it to like him being possessed. Like I think nurses have been traumatized by my son. This is like, it's really severe. I could go on, but it's like, it's really scary.
Rebecca, thank you for sharing. I will echo what Rebecca's saying. There seems to have been an explosion in the last 2 to 3 months.
I also want to say PANS is the like umbrella term. PANDAS is a type of PANS.
Yes.
PANDAS is specific to.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So PANS is an umbrella term, and PANDAS is specific to strep, and PANS can be any infection.
There was one study recently that showed that the steroid taper was helpful. We did show that to a couple doctors. And they tried it and it worked for the individual patients they used it for. So just in case that helps. Okay, and then I have one last question, if I can find it in my list. Okay, here it is. Do we have demographic breakdown by race/age of the pediatric participants?
Hi, everyone. Yes, we do at this time. We are still actively enrolling. So we're really working towards enhancing and having a very diverse community. But currently, as of today, 13% of our cohort identify as being Black or African American. 23% are identifying as being Hispanic or Latino. 9% identifying as Asian, and 60% identifying as white. And we are recruiting across the full age spectrum, all the way from newborn period to young adulthood through age 25. And we are pretty evenly distributed across these age groups, with, you know, representing kind of infants and preschool and toddlers, and then another age group of school-age children and teenagers and young adults. We're pretty evenly distributed across the ages.
That's great. It's great.